Greetings and salutations, Afrolytes. This is I, AfroMandias, back with another video today. I know, I'm posting regularly now, and I'm actually kind of happy with it. So, I'm, shorter intro today. Obviously you guys know what the deal is. You guys read the title of the video. Not gonna, you know, delve too much into it. Just want to say first off, I'm kind of glad to how consistently these videos are starting to come out, and I've noticed on my social blade, for the most part that it is getting some views. I've checked back on my very first video and I saw that it was around 31 views. So just want to say for those who've seen my videos, thank you. And I'm really happy how this is coming along. So let's continue that drive, right? Again, kind of a shorter intro today because, you know, yeah, I've already kind of said my dues in my last videos, just basically me putting out there, you know, what I want and, how happy I am. The videos are consistently coming out. I apologize if you see me frantically moving. My legs are very itchy. I don't know why. Like, I didn't shave them at all. So hopefully there's no fleas around here, right? Ooh, that would be scary. Um, but, just want to say that I'm kind of happy to how consistently these videos are coming out. And again, do expect them to come around out every Wednesday in the morning or so. So just kind of keep your eyes out on that. And I'll also be posting to my Instagram page. And I'm thinking about starting a Twitter. I know that place is a cesspool of crime and villainy and whatnot, but I feel like Instagram, I feel like only having one outlet for my creative stuff is not, I feel like I would benefit better if I start posting it on other like pages and whatnot. And if you guys have any recommendations to other places I could post my pictures and whatnot, just let me know down in the comments. But other than that aside, let's talk about today's video. And again, it's going to be another creating a champion. I know you guys are like, oh, where's another building ambassador video? Let's just slow down. I'm still in the Great War Saga right now. The villains will be coming soon. I swear to you. It's just right now we're still kind of in the Great War Saga, and as I've mentioned before, saying that there is a villain or a hero, it's more or less like an antagonist and protagonist, right? Again, when you're focusing on wars and stuff like that, there's no such thing as a good guy or a bad guy. They do not determine who's right, they determine who's left. Anywho, today we're going to be talking about another one of my champions today, and that is David Washington. Yes, that's right, David Washington. Now, you guys may have seen pictures of him already. I posted it to my Instagram. Basically, he's the white dude next to the giant dinosaur lady and whatnot. So, let's talk about him. Where did he come from? Who is he? How did he pop into my brain juices? So, let's talk about his origins right quick, or what I have about him so far. So, David, I had his name, David, just David Washington. I'll remember his name later, but I have like this weird thing of how the Washingtons do their middle names, but essentially David Washington is a metahuman from the Chronicle universe. And obviously, if you guys had watching my last video, I had mentioned that he is actually also from the same Earth that Andreas was. And I had mentioned before that Andreas is not really too fond of metahumans. He's a little bit racist towards them and whatnot. So, that's kind of a character flaw that Andreas has. But, like, why is there so much hatred towards metahumans? Let's just kind of put things in perspective. If we lived in a world where a guy has the ability to shoot fire out of his fingertips, or some lady has the ability to fly at supersonic speeds, we would be a little more cautious around them, right? Oh, who am I kidding? Why are we even prevaricating about the bush? No, we would hate them, like, look at what's going on now in the real world, right? There's still people who hate other people just because of their skin tone, right? I guarantee for a fact that there's some people out there who hate me because I'm a little less darker than them, right? So, I guarantee for a fact that if there were some people out there like mutants or metahumans and whatnot, we would hate them. And I know there's going to be some people in the comments like, oh, I wouldn't hate metahumans. I sure say that until, a metahuman robs you, and then, yeah, anywho. So metahumans are they just kind of came about one day in this universe. I may actually do a video talking about where they come from, where they go, where they come from, kind of like Joe, you know. I don't know why I said that. It's kind of early in the morning right now, but that's, metahumans are essentially my mutants in this universe, and they're both present in the Chronicle and Legend universe. Um, they don't really make much of a big appearance in the Legend universe, but they are very crucial in the Chronicle universe. So, that's kind of where they came from, and I may make a video. I'm still kind of writing about how they came from, or like how they got involved. It has to do something with elementals and whatnot. So, that's the metahuman side. Let's talk about David Washington. Where did he come from? So David Washington is a Florida-born man who was born with the abilities known as Red Hot Chili Peppers. And you are probably raising both your eyebrows right now, or one of them, if you're The Rock or whatever. But you're like, Afro, why would ability be called Red Hot Chili Peppers? Isn't that an alternative rock band or something? And that you're right. They are, Red Hot Chili Peppers is one of my favorite, rock bands of all time. Danny California, Tell Me Baby, Stadium Arcadium is one of my favorite albums. But, it's just one of those things. You get, there's a manga called JoJo's Bizarre Adventure where they have, not necessarily abilities, but they have these things called stands, and that is their ability. And their abilities are named after popular songs and whatnot. So, there's obviously there is a Red Hot Chili Peppers in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. If you know, you know. I'm not really gonna dive into it because there's plenty of videos already talking about that. But I kind of took that concept and I made it into my own. Is that's what their abilities is called, is Red Hot Chili Peppers. So you guys may be wondering, what's Red Hot Chili Peppers? Red Hot Chili Peppers essentially makes the individual run at supersonic speed. Oh, wow. So this is the Flash, basically. Yes, but no, shut up. But, this is basically, allows them to run at supersonic speed, but it also allows them to have electrokinesis. So they have the ability to shoot lightning out of their fingers. They can make, lightning bolts and whatnot. So it's both like offensive and defensive, like ability, I guess you could say. I guess if you want to say defense, he can run away really fast, and offense, shoot lightning bolts and whatnot. So yes, in this universe, David Washington is my Flash. He doesn't really go by Flash, but I'm going to get to that when I get to that. But basically, David Washington grew up around in the 1920s, and not in the 1920s necessarily, but when the Great War saga kind of happens is around nearing the 1920s, because as we expand on later on, the jailbirds, they kind of take place around in the 1950s and whatnot. So I'm saying that, but I may change it later on, but that's kind of my rough time estimate, but what does he do? Why is he so important to the story? Why David Washington of all people? So David Washington is actually a superhero. Yep, here we go. So, obviously, it's like, oh, he's just a Flash. Boo, throw tomatoes and whatnot. Hear me out, okay? David Washington, yes, he is a vigilante who, uses his powers to stop crime and whatnot, right? However, as I mentioned before, the world doesn't really take kindly to people who have the ability to run somewhat faster than Usain Bolt, right? So it's just like, if David Washington's a hero, then why would he use his name David Washington? He doesn't. He actually goes by the alias of Thunderbird, and he has the ability, obviously uses his abilities to stop crime and whatnot. And let's just say that the world isn't really too keen on supers running about and being vigilantes. Obviously, that's a very, old comic trope that either the government outlaws superheroes or the mainstream media doesn't like superheroes. Spider-Man, The Incredibles, it's been done before. but I want to take it into my hands and kind of explain, like, in a way that it's kind of retreading on old ground, but at the same time, I kind of twist it into my narrative. I'm going to explain that in just a minute, but basically, that's kind of where David Washington is, right? He's basically, this guy who kind of grew up in a very like tension filled time, especially when it came to his people and whatnot, that, it was basically him against the world, right? Other metahumans were kind of in hiding, so he couldn't really have a community that he could surround himself with. And, that kind of actually ties back to his origin story, is that, at one point he did have a couple of straggler friends that he was with. He thought he could trust them, and he told them that he was, a metahuman. They obviously were like, oh no, we like metahumans and whatnot, right? And there were a bunch of hippies and whatnot, but there was a thing going on about like ransoms on like metahumans and whatnot, right? So this is when David Washington was much younger and wasn't involved, in the Great War Saga until much later on. But, while they were driving their van down a road one time, David and Washington were just kind of vibing with his friends. But then they backstab him, or should I say front stab him. They held him down and they started stabbing him, right? I know that was a little, kind of a jump there, but that's basically what happened, is that they were, David and them were kind of talking, and, David was kind of high. So obviously he wasn't like sober or anything. He wasn't in the right mindset, and they took advantage of that. They stabbed him to kind of weaken him, I guess. They were also kind of high too. So obviously, a couple of screws were loose. But they brought him to the county station, and they arrested him because he was a metahuman. And one way that a person can tell, because I know what you guys are saying is like, oh, how do you know that someone's a metahuman, right? Is that on their like backs, on like your like spinal cord, there's a pigmentation change, right? So on a back of an individual, how you can tell if they're a metahuman is they have like weird pigmentation of the skin. Like, it's like what's that word? It's the skin condition where like they have like patches of different skin tones and whatnot. It's not alopecia. I think it's vitiligo. Correct me in the comments, but I think it's called vitiligo. So think of it like that, but it's just like a singular line on the back. Like, that is the only way that you can tell that an individual is a metahuman, is if they have that weird skinmentation line on their back. And that, of course led to their, let's just say not so nice word for them, known as a spine stripe or a striped spine, vice versa. It doesn't really matter. So the, spine stripes, as people like to insult the metahumans, that's kind of how they got that name, is because of the skin pigmentation on their back. So, of course, David's taken in. They're like, the police were obviously they were happy they were able to get the metahuman, but they were also like, you didn't have to stab the guy and whatnot. But they arrested them because weed was also illegal into where they were coming from. So it's kind of ironic that they, wanted to try to get the money prize, but they also got arrested. Anywho, so that's just a part of David's past I wrote about that kind of adds to his trauma about how it feels around humans. But this kind of adds to his heroism because, he is filled with that trauma. Instead of using that to hate humanity, he instead uses it to drive himself to prove to humanity that metahumans, excuse me, oh, I'm sorry, I had a burp coming, but to prove to humanity that metahumans aren't so bad. So later on, obviously, when he gets out of the military, yeah, they send him to the military because, the government can exploit metahumans. They don't really like them, but they can exploit them for weapons, right? As like weapons. So, you can, if you could throw a car, you could throw a tank, right? And whatnot. So basically, he was in the military for a couple of years. So, hey, veteran representation, right? remember, always remember the phrase that if you don't believe that the government's going to do something, oh yes, they absolutely would. Look into the history books, MK Ultra, the Tuskegee experiments, they will do it. The government is full of bad people. But still kind of writing out his origin story, but that's kind of the main gist of it until we get to the Great War Saga. So David Washington is the Thunderbird, and him and Andreas kind of meet in they kind of live around in the same area. And Andreas, as I mentioned in my last video, isn't really too keen on metahumans and whatnot. Ironic, because he technically becomes a metahuman in a way. If you want to know how he becomes a metahuman, just go back to my last video, or my 2 videos beforehand, because I have my Jack video up now. So, either way, you'll know when you see it, right? I'll have a playlist. But basically, that's kind of, how David gets involved is that, obviously, as I mentioned in my Andreas video, a bunch of ships crash into the city that they were at, and David Washington kind of using this opportunity to show the world that metahumans aren't bad people, he puts on his costume and he goes out and saves people, right? So, obviously people are like, don't touch me, metahuman, or spine stripe, whatever, he still does it anyway because he wants to prove to them that metahumans aren't bad people, right? So obviously, his goodwill and good nature catches up to him, unfortunately, and cops kind of had him at gunpoint. And obviously, you guys are wondering, oh, but he has super speed and whatnot. Yeah, he has super speed, but he isn't as fast as you think he is yet, right? He's like, if I had to say right now, David Washington up until this point around in the Great War Saga isn't as flash as, like, say, Wally West Flash, but he is fast as, like, Jake Garrett Flash. If you guys know comics, you know what I'm exactly talking about, right? So, he's fast, but he's not that fast yet, but obviously he gets arrested and he gets placed in the same, like, confinement as Andreas. And the story. They are essentially arbiters for the Great War for humanity, and they try to figure out what's going on and whatnot. So this is kind of at the point to where their stories kind of differ, because while Andreas kind of goes off and does his own thing, so does David, right? So in a way, they kind of make a deal to themselves, is that, like, okay, let's try to figure out both sides of the, like, conflict and see what's going on. So David and Andreas kind of split up for the time being, and so Andreas goes with the Jury and the Elementals, while David goes with the Jorians and the Xerxians, right? So they kind of get themselves, like, an even playing field about what sides are fighting for and whatnot, and try to come to a consensus, right? So Andreas is doing his own thing. So let's talk about where David is in all this, right? So David in the Great War Saga is not faring well at all, because I'm still kind of writing some things out, but I know in some parts of the story, obviously he meets Alva, and those two kind of hit it off and whatnot. But it starts off as, like, a prisoner kind of situation where he is Alva's prisoner and whatnot, and he gets dropped off on the savage, like, dinosaur planet and whatnot. So David is basically so while Andreas is kind of, like, chilling out and trying to figure out, like, what's going on and training with the Jury Rays and Elementals, David is just fighting for his life on a savage, like, dragon dinosaur planet while being hunted by a dinosaur princess. So to say that they're gonna have a long talk when they get back, they're gonna have a long talk when they get back, right? So and obviously with David and essentially when David kind of goes with Alva and Osiris, as I mentioned in my last video, he kind of forms more of a closer bond with those two. He's not saying that they're right in the conflict, but since he spent time with them more, he kind of has more of, like, a building relationship between those two, especially Alpha. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge, So, this kind of explains why David when he goes back to Earth, he doesn't come back with Andreas, because Andreas lives. It's just he's doing his own thing right now. But it kind of explains why David is kind of part of the big trio, the big like quadruplet or whatever it's called in the Chronicle universe. With David, Alva, and Himawari, or Rose, I should say, right? I guess you could say Isaac Irons too. So 5 people, they make up the Immortals, or the founding member of the Immortals, right? So, with all that being said, this kind of explains, this is kind of their building of their friendship slash, for Alva's case, her husband, right? So, again, still kind of writing the story, and I don't want to go into too many plot details, but, the Great War Saga comes to an end, as I mentioned. Everyone's dead. At least, all the main characters are still alive. Their families and their friends and their entire race and home, not so much. They flip 2 tails, I guess you could say, right? So, of course, you know the rules, so do I. They get blasted off the planet and they go their own separate ways. However, unlike Jack and Rose, who went to planet Earth, David and Alva went to a different planet. Again, still kind of writing this out, but this is basically the beginning of the Bad Company story arc, right? So Bad Company obviously is the story between David and Alva, kind of freeing a slave Battle Nexus planet and whatnot. And obviously, David and Alva kind of grow their bond together. Where I'm going, they kiss and whatnot. So, still kind of writing out that story and still kind of figuring out where to go, at least on that story arc, because I know how it ends. Obviously, Jack and Rose come to Battle Nexus and first of all kind of establishes that as a colony of Earth. So, as a kind of a resource builder, I guess you can say, but also to retrieve their friends, David and Alva, right? So obviously there's a beginning and there's an end, but I'm still kind of figuring out the middle. Obviously the Battle Nexus is run by a race of oh my goodness, run by a race of alien beings known as the Zircons. And the Zircons are kind of similar to the Krang and the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. They're just tiny little aliens, not like tentacle monsters or anything, but little tiny humanoid aliens that control robot bodies and whatnot. So, still kind of writing it out, still kind of designing it, but, you'll know when you know, and who knows, I may make a future video explaining what Battle Nexus is and what the war, what the Bad Company story is and whatnot, but that's kind of just the main gist of it, right? So, David and Alva are brought back to Earth, and David is he's happy, but at the same time he's kind of sad because he realizes, I guess it's just back to square one, because when he was on the Battle War Nexus, they were seen as heroes and everyone kind of respected them. So it was a nice change of pace for David, but at the same time, it wasn't really his home. He didn't have a place there. He didn't have other humans to talk to. It was just more or less other little aliens and his giant dinosaur girlfriend, right? So obviously when he gets back to Earth, he's gonna feel happy, but at the same time it's happy. You're happy because everything is normal now, right? It's kind of just going back to square one, but you're happy about it. Some people would like that, others not really, but anywho, but that's when the twist is. Obviously, as I mentioned in my Jack video and my Chronicle video, check that out if you want to kind of get the whole gist about the universe and whatnot. Jack actually, along with the Jailbirds, Jack had formed Jack was a part of this thing called the United Undercover, and that found the Jailbirds, and the Jailbirds kind of coagulated themselves into the United Undercover, and then that's when they took down the world president and gave metahuman rights. So obviously Jack and Rose tell David the good news, and David is just awestruck by this, and he sees that still kind of everyone's still kind of trying to get used to it and whatnot, but there is no hate. David sees people flying in the skies without anyone shooting them down. He sees a guy, like, how, what creme brulee is? It's, obviously you get the flamethrower and you kind of like torch up a dessert and whatnot. Again, I'm for all my exquisite taste audience, you guys know what I'm talking about. But you see a guy using like flame from his fingertips to kind of like make a creme brulee and whatnot. And David, he gets teary-eyed because he realizes that now, he doesn't have to hide anymore. He can be himself. And, that's kind of where the story, leads off for Bad Company anyway, and that's when they form the Immortals. Obviously, Bad Company still kind of goes on. It's like a little side thing that David and Alva kind of do. It's like the dynamic duo, like the Batman and Robin, or, we can't really think of any other like duo team, like Iron Man and War Machine, Bucky Barnes and Captain America. Except, I don't like to put the first place over the last, because originally it was like David and Alva, but I was like, and I thought Alva and David, and I was like, So I just, there's not really a person who like takes charge, but it's like it's a dynamic duo. It's the lovey-dovey superhero couple. Like Mr. Miracle and Big Bertha, Green Arrow and Black Canary, Batman and Catwoman. It's kind of like that. They're their own like superhero dynamic team. So they have their own adventures, doing their own thing. But when drastic times call for drastic measures, they founded the Immortals. And you're wondering what the Immortals are. I mentioned that in my last video. It's just my version of the Avengers / the Justice League, right? If you want more information about that, check out my Jack video. But that's kind of where it leads off for, David Washington. Not necessarily to say that the story ends there, but it's just, that's kind of the gist about who David Washington is, right? He's a guy who can run really fast and shoot lightning bolts out of his fingertips. Bang, bang, right? And, obviously, let's talk about his characteristics. Who is he morally? Again, he's kind of like, as I mentioned before, he's basically the Flash in my universe. So think of him as like the Barry Allen from the Justice League cartoon in my universe, right? He's wisecracking. He's the funny man. He's the kind of the comedy. He's the comedic relief of the story and whatnot. Obviously, timed right. We're not talking about Marvel jokes and whatever. Don't even get me started on what Marvel movie jokes and whatnot. But that's kind of his role that he serves, is that he's more of the heart of the Immortals and definitely the kind of, the glue that kind of like holds everything together, right? Because, not only does David show the world that, metahumans are more than what they are made out to be, but also he shows Alva. He shows and teaches Alva that not everything has to be about war or violence and whatnot. So this is why she grows to love him, is that, she learns a different perspective and kind of, sees that, there's more to him than what meets the eye. And obviously with all this power that he has, he doesn't use it to hurt people or like, prove something, but instead he uses it to protect and to help others. Obviously, Alva being more of a prideful, egotistical character at the start of it, she kind of mellows out and kind of gets humbled throughout the story, thanks to the Cinderella Man, and she realizes that she's not really cracked up what she thought she was. Obviously, she's gonna, when I do write out the comic and draw out the comic and whatnot, Alva kind of gets her stuff rocked. She kind of gets her world rocked because, obviously she's surrounded by a bunch of like yes men and women who are like, yes, Queen Alva, you are the greatest, you are the daughter of King Adam, you are, of course, you're the number one like top dog. And obviously, all this gas goes to her head and whatnot, and she thinks she's all that, but when she meets someone not only just as strong, but if so not as, as stronger than her, she's like, oh, I guess I'm not really cracked up as I thought I was. But David doesn't do this in a way to embarrass her, but it's just to show her that just because you have the power doesn't necessarily mean you should use it to harm others. And, again, this is I'm going to explain why that is so important to me, but let's kind of take a step back a minute. I had mentioned that superheroes kind of exist in my universe, right? So that was a lie. I just lied to you. I'm very sorry. Don't unsubscribe to my channel, please. I'm begging you. There's a reason why I lied to you, okay? So, yes, in a technical sense, superheroes do exist in my universe, but it's not in the way that you think. Obviously, when you hear the word superhero, you obviously think of like Batman, Spider-Man, Superman. What do they have all in common? They have alter egos, right? So, for Batman, there's Bruce Wayne. For Spider-Man, Peter Parker, or Miles Morales, I guess if you want to add that into the equation. Superman, Clark Kent, right? So, all these alter egos are meant to not only protect themselves from their enemies, but also protect their loved ones from their enemies. Obviously, when Spider-Man revealed himself in the Civil War story arc, he paid the consequences. Kingpin hired an assassin to kill Spider-Man, but instead shot, Aunt May. Then, obviously Peter being Peter, beat the daylights out of Kingpin in a jail cell in front of all of his, underlings. So, that just goes to show how raw Peter can be, right? But, in my universe, in a technical sense, yes, superheroes do exist, but it's not for the reasons that you think. In a way, the reason that superheroes exist is a form of an outlet for the metahumans, right? So obviously in therapy, or at least if you want to kind of keep yourself sane, some people have an escape, whether it's unfortunately harmful, like drinking or doing drugs, or rather if it's not as harmful, like playing video games or working out, right? People have an escape. So in a way, this is kind of therapy for the metahumans. They can use their powers, but without people knowing who they are, right? You guys kind of following what I'm getting? They can put on these masks and they don't have to feel, obviously the world's going to hate them no matter what, but at least they can have comfort in the fact that they know that the world doesn't know who they are. You see where I'm coming at with this? So in a way, this is kind of therapy for the metahumans. And even then, superheroes are such a small and minute thing in my Chronicle universe that when it's all said and done, when metahumans are given rights, they don't need the mask anymore. They don't need to hide themselves from the world. They can be who they want to be, and whatnot. So I'm going to mention this in my, I'm only going to put this here now, but obviously I'm not going to go in depth with it. But Caboose, you guys are wondering, who the heck is Caboose? He is a character from the Jailbirds, story arc. And I'm obviously going to have videos on all of those guys, right? But, Caboose, he kind of has his own superhero identity known as the Rubber Band Man, right? So he kind of uses it to put himself into hiding because at that point he fought against one of the world's best agencies and like a subdivision of the world government, right? So he kind of goes into hiding. And one of the ways he goes into hiding is to put on a mask. So, obviously that, it's not the most mind-blowing thing in the world, but it's a nice little departure from how we think about superheroes and alter egos and whatnot, right? It's kind of it's just an escape for them to allow them to use their abilities without the world knowing who they truly are as individuals, right? Obviously, as I mentioned, the world hates them. So, at least I'll give you a reason to hate me. Obviously there's going to be some metahumans who use it for bad, other metahumans like David use it for good, right? So, again, as I mentioned before, it's with that great power that whoever is bestowed upon them, it's up to them to use it for good or for bad, and obviously in David's case, he was given an extraordinary power set. So let's talk about that right quick, right? So as I mentioned before, he's basically the Flash in my universe, right? So he has the ability to run really, really fast, right? So, you know, he has the ability to kind of run at supersonic speeds to a point to where time kind of basically stops. And I know, like I just said, that, you know, Great War. The thing is that Great War David is much slower. It's much slower than like current time David, right? Because he develops his skills and he develops his abilities, right? So, you know, that's kind of how his development and his powers goes. Is that he gets a lot faster when he gets older, right? You know, you'd think it would be the other way around, but you know, and you know, that's I'll explain that in a minute, right? So he also has the ability of electrokinesis. That means he has the ability to control lightning or other sorts of like power conductors and whatnot, right? So see this light right here, he can absorb light. You know, he can absorb the electricity that's going through this light, or he can power it up to, you know, make it brighter or whatnot, right? He also has this sub ability known as the other side. Embrace yourselves for this, because the other side is basically my version of the Speed Force. I know, throw your tomatoes, bring out your pitchforks, I don't care. It's just basically my version of the Speed Force, and that it's a power that all Washingtons can tap into to increase their speed and their power set, right? So, and this goes for all Washingtons. So, you know, this goes for David, his son, Dobreas, which he's going to have his own separate video, and I may talk about that later. But yes, he does. Him and Alva kissing in a, you know, sitting in a tree, Kassing. They have a son, you know, Dobreas, half metahuman, half Jorian and whatnot. He's going to have his own separate video, but just know that he also has access to the other side. So does Alva. Alva, you know, technically by proxy being a Washington, has a form of her own other side that allows her to tap into this like Speed Force kind of thing. So, you know, it takes a lot of like will and strength, but she has a lot of will and strength, you know, especially when she announces or denounces her like name and title as the Jorian Queen, but instead takes up the name of Washington, because in one part of the story, actually, you know what, I'm gonna save that for Alva's video. It'll make a lot more sense and have a lot more catharsis behind it. But you know, Alva takes up David's last name as Alva Washington, so that allows her to be granted the powers of a Washington. You know, obviously it's not easy, but you know, when the Washington or the will of Washington finds her worthy, then boom, jams. You know, she's given those abilities. So, you know, with all that being said, what does David mean to me? So, David is a very, very weird case, both David and Alva, because, you know, I had them in the back of my head for so long, I just didn't know where to put them. And I know you guys are like, oh, you said that about every single character you've ever drawn and written. Shut up, okay? Just listen to me, okay? But, you know, for like David and Alva's case, they actually started off as side characters of another story project I had. I don't remember it. I wish I did. I can't remember what it was or what it was about, but they actually started off as like side characters, as like agents for some super secret organization. I wish I could remember where I had those two, but you know, the main characters were so uninteresting that I don't even remember what their names were. But I kind of like the idea of this, you know, giant, you know, head honcho woman who doesn't crack jokes, and like her little like little boyfriend who like cracks jokes all the time and is her better half and whatnot, and she's his better half, and you know, yada yada yada. So that's kind of where he got started. And you know, the thing is that David wasn't actually the, you know, like the Deuterogonus of the Great War saga. It was actually another character named Muhammad Joel. But I kind of thought about it, and I couldn't really see anything with that character or like how much focus it would be put on him. So I kind of, not to say I got rid of him, but I just, you know, I guess for like role purposes, I don't think he would have filled as big of a role as David would have. Yeah. Excuse me, I'm sorry. But again, that kind of, and also he was also one of my first like Muslim characters, and he was gonna die, so I was like, it would feel kind of awkward if I just had this like Muslim representation and just have him die in the first like story that he's represented in, right? So, I put, remember the shelf? Muhammad Joel, I'm gonna just sit you up there, buddy. You sit tight, okay? I'm gonna find a story for you. You just sit up there, okay? So, he was supposed to play the the comedic relief, but I kind of felt that, in his case, I feel like he's a character with a lot more potential to be written in a story that has a lot more depth in there. Again, I'm gonna find a role for him. I just don't know when, and I just don't know how yet. But I thought about it, and I was like, you know what? I feel like it would be better because it would be a good starting point for the relationship between, David, Jack, and Alva, and Himawari or Rose, right? So these characters kind of know each other already because they fought in the Great War. So, David going along with Andreas just kind of makes a lot more sense because obviously when the Great War saga ends, and they're back on Earth, and they kind of get all their stuff together, there's already an established relationship between Jack, Rose, Alva, and David. So there's already like a friendship kind of, alliance formed, friendship formed, godparents of each other's children, right? So, and for like David and whatnot, he's great because honestly, he is kind of one of the first metahumans that I kind of came up with, and as I mentioned, that little snowball at the top kind of rolls down into a bigger giant avalanche and whatnot. So David, he's an awesome character, and I can't wait to kind of write out his story and have you guys kind of read out his story and see the development that he has on other characters, especially Alva, because I feel like, if I had to say what is my favorite, like, power couple in my, like, universes and whatnot, I would say probably David and Alva, just because of how much they contrast between one another. Obviously, Alva's more of the hot-headed one and more brutish and a lot more, like, headstrong, while David's more of the laid back, funny man. They kind of keep a balance of one another. Alva, reminds David that we're in reality and we gotta get stuff done. But David reminds Alva that, just take it easy, relax, just breathe. Not everything has to be so serious. So if I had to say those are kind of the reasons why David and Alva are kind of one of my favorite couples. Obviously, all my couples that I made in my universes are my favorite, but, for David and Alva's case, they're probably my favorite, because of how much they kind of complement but also contradict each other. So again, as I mentioned before, these are gonna be like more shorter form videos because I am just explaining one character with little hints of other characters being involved. But I just want to say that back to the superheroes thing, I'm gonna make it short, but superheroes technically do exist in my universe. They just don't wear masks and they just don't have names, right? So when it's all said and done, when the metahumans are given those rights, metahumans don't need a reason to put on the mask and whatnot and hide themselves. And so, obviously, again, it's not the most groundbreaking thing, but honestly, I feel like it's a nice little subversion to how superheroes are represented in my media, So, tell me what you guys think. Should I work on it, or is it pretty, is it like something that's unique? Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. But Other than that, I am AfroMandias. Thank you so much for watching, and tune in to next week's video. Talk to y'all soon. Stay fresh, stay frosty, Afrolytes.